Welcome to the Oxford Clay Pottery Podcast. I'm Catherine Tomlinson and I started an eco conscious pottery company called Oxford Clay. Now, Oxford Clay, I don't just make pottery, I also make books and courses for other potters who want to be more environmentally friendly in their pottery making. And that's what this podcast is all about. And I can't wait to get started. Let's go. In this episode, we're going to be talking about making pottery glazes. And when you're working with any powders in pottery, powdered rocks, powdered clays, ashes, you must always use an FFP3 face mask to protect your lungs. Hello, welcome back to the Oxford Clay Pottery Podcast. I'm your host, Catherine Tomlinson, and it's lovely to be back here with you. Thank you so much for joining me this week. And in today's episode, we're going to be talking about some sources of ash for ash glazing. So I love ash glazing. It's something I'm really passionate about, really interested in. Do a loads of experimentation with like different ashes. And in this episode, I thought it'd be quite a good sort of episode to tell you about just like all the different places that I've been thinking about in terms of like where to get ash from and all the different sources. Because yeah, there are lots. You don't, yeah, there's a lot of opportunity with ash glazing. So um, okay, so if you're completely new to ash glazing and you're like, what's happening right now with ash in a pottery glaze? Ash is basically a fantastic ingredient to use in stoneware pottery glazes. So it needs to be fired up to stoneware temperatures because the ash needs to be high fired basically to melt. But it's an amazing ingredient to use in pottery glazes. It's a very complex ingredient. So often ash glazes are really simple. So for example, the glaze I use in my work is just it's 40% ash, and I can sort of exchange like different ashes, so it can be like kind of ashes from like all different sources, make completely different glazes because they have a different, slightly different sort of mineral and trace metal composition, so you can get like really interesting kind of different coloration and stuff when you use different ashes. So it's 40 parts of ash and it needs to be sieved before you make it into a glaze. It's 40 parts Cornish stone, which you can substitute. If you don't have Cornish stone, you can substitute it for like a feldspar. And then it's 20% quartz. So it's a really simple recipe. And that's why I really love ash glazing, because the recipes are often very simple, but they often make really exquisite glazes because they're so kind of they're so unique and complex in terms of like the kind of color variations and the colors they create and the speckling they create, the speckled effect, and they are just so beautiful. So yeah, let's talk about where you would get ash from. Okay, so I was reading a book on ash glazing. I sort of read a lot about like ash glazing topic, and there was a potter in one of the books that was talking about how it's a really good idea to have a kind of like a source of ash that is kind of like consistent. So say for example, you want to kind of make the same type of like glaze on your pottery, you're kind of going to need the same kind of wood or leaves. We'll talk about like some various options for ash in a second. But like yeah, so you're kind of going to need to have like the same source to make the same glaze, because they do vary in terms of like what they look like, in terms of like what plant you've used and stuff. So yeah, this potter in this book gave this specific example of like a tree that was felled by a storm, and they were like, oh, it made this incredibly beautiful glaze. I think it was maybe like a walnut tree or something that had been felled by a storm, and then they kind of like they like salvaged the wood, burned it, made it into an ash glaze, made it into glaze, and they said like it was like the most beautiful glaze they'd ever seen, and they were like, this is amazing. But then they only had this one tree that had been felled, in that particular area, because the soil also can make a difference in terms of like the way an ash glaze looks, because the plant will like have a different mineral and trace metal like composition depending on like the conditions it's been growing in. So yeah, that's one thing that is a kind of downside of ash glazing, is just that like they can be quite like sort of like there's a lot of variation basically, and a kind of yeah inconsistency in terms of like how the glaze is looking depending on what kind of ash is used. So yeah, so that's the first thing to say. If you want a kind of consistent glaze, you're going to need, I guess, like like a consistent source of this ash, or you're going to need to like not mind basically if your pottery is like looking different every time when you're using kind of the similar kind of ash, but might look a little bit different. Okay, so the first source of ash is like recycling ash from like a wood burning stove. So that's the ash like I use in my pottery. I basically have some kind people in my life that like give me ash from their heating systems where they use wood burning stove. They generally burn. They tell me that they basically burn like wood consistently, the same kind of wood. So they'll burn like a hardwood in the wood burning stove. Have a few different sources of that ash, and but everyone's burning hardwood. And I collect it up, like sieve it, and then I use it in my pottery glazing, exactly the same recipe that I was just yeah that I just mentioned at the beginning of the episode. So yeah, so wood fired stove. They are really good, but the problem is, you need to know like what someone is burning. But generally that's great source of ash because it's like, recycled from yeah, that ash would probably be thrown away otherwise. I mean, some people use it on their garden and stuff, but yeah, that ash is it would be thrown away, and you can recycle it into a pottery glaze. So it's absolutely fantastic. Okay, the next source of ash, which I've tried, is I actually there was actually a wood fired pizza oven kind of van that used to operate quite near my house, and I basically said to them, do you mind if I have like the ash from your wood fired pizza oven, if you're throwing it away, this is something I can use in my pottery. And they were like, yeah, that's fine. So I collected like a big bucket of their ash, and I actually don't know what wood they were burning, I'm not sure, but the glaze that ash made was a kind of matte. It was like a matte kind of grayish purpley glaze. It was super interesting. So it'd be very interesting to kind of go back to them and say like, what were you actually burning? But that is another source of ash, and they, businesses, say like pizza businesses that would fire their pizzas, they're going to be like they're a consistent source of ash, again slightly out of your control in terms of like what they're burning to get that ash. So that might, create some kind of like an unknown aspect in your work, but that is a great source of recycled ash. So um, the next source of ash is that you could use like waste wood, or like say like things that maybe are would kind of be composted normally, or say like for example I was saying about the beginning of the episode, like plants, trees and stuff that have like naturally been felled by storms, or like prunings are a really good source as well. So like plants that are getting pruned anyway, um, that kind of natural kind of garden waste that you would have in the garden, again, is really good to have like a single source of it. So for example, like one type of prunings, say you do a load of like prunings on, I don't know, I'm trying to think what you would prune, maybe like a rose bush or something, and then you collected all those prunings up, dried them really really well, and then you could burn them, and then you would know, oh, this is from a rose bush, this wood, that would be, that would be a really good source of ash because you know where it's from, and that is again a waste product that you're kind of recycling into an ash, into a pottery glaze. I'm just interrupting this episode to tell you about a totally free guide I've made just for you on how to make a stoneware pottery glaze. So, if you've never made a glaze before, or if you make loads of glazes and you just want a recipe, this guide is for you. It tells you everything you need to know, and it's available via the link in the show notes. Let's get on with the episode. So yeah, garden prunings or naturally felled trees, say like from storms and stuff. Um, Okay, the next source of ash is things that like you would perhaps throw away anyway. Sort of, for example, like it could be like kitchen waste products. So it could be something, for example, that you regularly buy. So for example, like tomato stalks. I've been experimenting recently with making pottery glazes from things like grape stalks and tomato stalks, and these are things I buy anyway, like to eat, just like from the supermarket. And I've been drying all the stalks in the in the kitchen, drying them all, saving them all. It has taken quite a while. It's taken about 6 months to kind of get enough to make a proper kind of amount of ash from. But that is definitely an option if you wanted to make like really unique glazes, from like things that you're going to be throwing away anyway. Yeah, like those kind of kitchen waste products. Yeah, stalks. You have to collect them up quite a while, but they are really fantastic to experiment with in terms of making ash glazes. And then another thing that I've been experimenting with recently is incense ash. So incense ash, so just from it burning incense sticks. So things like this that like you're creating ash anyway. So like, from you're burning an incense. Yeah, again, it does take a long time to collect enough ash to make into a glaze, but incense ash makes a beautiful kind of greeny browny colored glaze. It's so beautiful, exactly the same recipe as I said in the beginning of the episode. Yeah, just collecting all the incense sticks, just collecting the ash from them in a jar over a period of, again, probably about 6 months, and then having enough ash to make into a pottery glaze. So again, that's something that can be recycled, that you'd throw away normally. Um, and then the last place to get ash from for ash glazing could be fallen leaves. So I really love making ash glazes from fallen leaves. So these are leaves which have like fallen naturally as part of a plant's growing cycle. So it could be, say, like in the autumn when a lot of plants, like deciduous trees and stuff, like would just shed their leaves. And again, it's about like sort of keeping those leaves like separate from each other, so you know exactly like a single source of the leaf, so you know exactly like what kind of glaze it's going to make. And if you're interested in like kind of finding out more about like glazing with plants and glazing with leaves, I've got a specific book on the Oxford Clay website about glazing with leaves, with fallen leaves, and you can see what each glaze looks like. There's sort of very common plants in the UK, which would be common in other parts of the world as well. But you can make a pottery glaze basically with any leaf. So and it's got the same recipe in that book, and you can just see examples basically of different glazes made with different leaves. And then if you wanted a kind of just a more general book on ash glazing, just in general, like just lots and lots of different types of plants, like woods and stuff tested, there's another book on the Oxford Clay website which is about plant ash glazing. So that's got like lots of different tests made with like lots of different woods, prunings, leaves again are in there. So leaves are such a good thing to glaze with. They're like a renewable source of a glaze making material. Like 40% of that glaze um, is going to be made with like a renewable material, because the leaves are renewing every year and they're getting dropped as part of the plant's natural growing cycle, and they do make fantastic glazes. So some of them just come out so beautiful, like really shiny, almost like pearlescent in terms of like just the kind of almost like a rutile kind of bluey, creamy white, loads of kind of really interesting colors in the like sort of very subtle coloration. They often very shiny. The shiny leaves create, what I found is shiny leaves create shiny glazes. And they're like beautiful. So loads of sources of ash for ash glazing. You don't just have to go, and don't know, get it from a kind of one source. There's so many different sources, and you can experiment with all these different kinds of ash. Loads of them are just either renewable or recycled from other uses. The ash is getting used for something else. The heat and the fuel is getting used for something else. And we can recycle that ash that's left at the end of that process into pottery glazes. Such an exciting field of pottery, and I absolutely love it. So thank you so much for joining me on this episode today, and really looking forward to seeing you on the next one. And wishing you very, very happy potting until then, and I'll see you soon. Goodbye. Thank you so much for joining me on that episode. And if you want to find out more about eco-friendly pottery, head over to the Octoclay website, which is www.oxfordclay.co.uk. Can't wait to see you there.